Yeah, hello all. Welcome to this talk. For some strange reason, I had to think of a name for this talk, and the best name that I could think of was a casual causal talk. Of course, the name is casual, but we are going to talk some very serious causal topics today. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Alex Eisenhart, director at London, and he's also a experienced epidemiologist. So welcome, Alex. I hope you'll be bombarded with a lot of questions from our participants at the end. But meanwhile, I would just like to open the floor to you and just say hi to all the participants.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Venkat. I'm very honored. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Alex, the very first question: what is the epidemiologist doing in marketing? How did you
Sure.
end up here? What is your career journey?
Yeah, sure. I guess I kind of got sideways into epidemiology. I was doing a master's in public health that could have gone in several directions. Um, and I ended up doing a master's thesis with a professor in the in the mental health part of the research institute that was associated with our uni. And the subject matter was super fascinating. I got into that. And then, I mean, it's a relatively niche field, the life of the scientist. I mean, you got to be, I have a lot of respect for people who dedicate themselves to that. But around the time I was wrapping up my cumulative thesis, I decided I was going to make the move into the private sector. And I wanted to live in London. I was doing studying in Germany at the time, and I'm from London, and I wanted to move back. And yeah, so I ended up getting into a small marketing agency doing Meta ads, Facebook ads. It wasn't called Meta yet back then, 2015. And that was kind of a relatively new player on the block in digital ads. And yeah, it all kind of started from there.
Great. And just to give a backstory to everybody on how this talk transpired, somebody on LinkedIn had commented that, MMs are not causal. Of course, we're going to talk about this topic at length later down the line. But yeah, who says LinkedIn can't be productive, right? And Alex and I touched base after that. We exchanged a lot of ideas. And he being a, epidemiologist, I would say that you're a very rare breed, Alex. It's very rare that people from a proper STEM or a science field, come into marketing. So the one question that I had for you was, since you come from epidemiology, where there's a lot of statistical rigor, a lot of emphasis on statistical accuracy, and you then come to, marketing, where you find that, hey, maybe the statistical rigor is not to the level where it should have been. So what has been your experience? Do you think we ought to apply more statistical rigor and accuracy in marketing? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because in a way it feels like in the field of MMM, there's a lot of advancements happening, right? People are using more advanced methods, ridge regression, all kinds of interesting different, there's all sorts of different stuff going on from different providers, Bayesian frequentist, you name it. And they're getting more advanced and they're getting more usable for people with less of a statistical background. And so what's interesting there is the modeling and the methods are really sound from a sort of pure maths and stats perspective. But what's kind of maybe missing there, which I've kind of seen coming from the epidemiology background, is being able to take that and apply it to the real world. Like the way I've learned statistics in the field of epidemiology, it's all about explaining what are the drivers of something, and from the beginning, confounders, how to model them, how to treat them, and understand them. And model designs to and study designs to understand these things have always been at the core of it. So yeah, it's kind of like we're getting the best tools, but we don't maybe have enough people who are putting these tools and using them contextually, and kind of it's very like model selection based on what has the best model fit, as opposed to trying to build a story and trying to understand what's going on. in the real world.
Yeah. What is your commentary on the prevalence that most of the marketers they rely on they rely on correlation a lot as opposed to causality, right? And most of the research papers that you find in marketing they heavily cite correlations, and even on most of the research papers, white papers, people just go back to it and say that hey, it is something strongly correlated with something. For example, attention is strongly correlated with sales, but you and I know and other statisticians know correlation is a very dicey metric. So what is your general commentary on this?
Yeah, I mean everything starts with correlation, right? Like every correlation is one of the pillars of the establishing causality that we need, right? But what's lacking is the discussions around, for our statisticians it's confounding and stuff, but actually like in the trade room in businesses, people talking between the various departments, they're talking about this stuff all day long, right? Our sales are a bit low over the weekend. The weather was good, or payday, end of the month, etc. There's so many things that get discussed in a causal fashion, but then when it comes to kind of modeling MMM statistics, I often feel there seems to be a lack of, like, the most interesting part of that is looking through the data and trying to understand, okay, well, this looks good, but why why could I be wrong? Why might the correlation of just A to B be wrong? Is there something else? And if you present a model to someone and he questions you on it, they're gonna have questions, right? Like, I think revenue's been getting better because I've been improving the CRO on our website. We got better conversion rates and all of this kind of stuff. I don't think it's because you spent more on this campaign, right? So it's a discussion everyone needs to have, but it's rarely the focus.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the questions that I had for you was, I haven't really done an RCT, but I understand that, from an epidemiology perspective, you must have done a lot of RCTs because the data is very conducive for it. But when you transition to marketing, all we have is the observational data, right? And then we are just left with, tools like quasi-causal methods. So do you think, there is some kind of, accuracy lacking, in comparison to RCT and quasi-causal methods, or do you think the quasi-causal methods are themselves enough given the observational data?
Well, I think we have different tools for different problems, right? And um, in the field of epidemiology I was in, the focus was largely on like observational cohort data. I did, like, a lot of my publications used clinical data, but they were quite they were a bit they were secondary to the sort of primary goal of the clinical study. And the institute around me, it's all how do you say, like, chronic disease epidemiology, right? So we've got cohort data, and it's exactly problem very, very similar to the MMM problem. Like, we don't have obviously like a daily, weekly time set, but we have observational one time point data on people. Do they have diabetes? Do they exercise a lot? Do they smoke? Do they have hypertension? And we're figuring out the effect of smoking on cancer and all of these kinds of things, right? And there's powerful tools. We've advanced a lot of things through that field of research, right? And on the other hand, those kind of tools don't work so well, for example, in the field of epidemiology for nutrition. Like, is it better to, eat this or that? Like, WHO was very proud to show red meat and the small risk increase for bowel cancer. But all in all, it's something that you can't measure well in population-based surveys, right? And then we can rely more on the experts who understand the biology in the food to guide us, right? And so in marketing, we've got to put the pieces together. We've got this information we've got on our ad platforms. They're telling us something about what's working, what isn't. Are we achieving what we wanted to with the strategy we're doing? And so, we can combine our methods to try and get to the truth. But the problem is when you just fixate on a single number somewhere, and that becomes, the be all and end all of where you should spend your budget, and what works and what doesn't.
Sure. Thanks for that example. In our course, we just covered one classic example of epidemiology, whether smoking causes cancer. And funnily, it wasn't proved through RCT. It was proved through, quasi-causal methods. And I believe that, quasi-causal methods have their, own advantages. And if you have got only observational data, those are the best methods to apply. So it's not required that you should apply RCTs always, but quasi-causal methods can also be really beneficial. So, stepping this talk a little bit, do you think causality can be applied in marketing? I'm asking this because there are still a lot of people, having this apprehension that, causality is something that cannot be applied to marketing. It remains in the realm of, maybe epidemiology, biostatistics, but in marketing, maybe it cannot be applied. What's your take on that?
Yeah, a lot of people are kind of saying that now, but or maybe more specifically, I've heard it to MMM, right? Like media or marketing mix modeling isn't causal.
Hmm.
Um, but everything we do in marketing is causal. I mean, there's nothing we're doing that isn't that, because we're constantly asking ourselves, if I put this ad out there, will it make people buy my product? If I spend more on this, will I get more revenue? If there's that is a cause and effect question. And we do have methods, as you say, like really good methods for trying to establish causality from observational data. It's not always possible in epidemiology. It's not always ethical to split it. In marketing, it's not always possible. And it can certainly be done. And they're really powerful tools, I think, to tell a story about what's happening beyond just, doing a media mix model and trying to suggest where the next pound is spent. But that work going into making a correct model, understanding how things interacted, when we went on sale, when demand was high and low, and how that affected things. That we're asking causal questions all the time. If we ignore that, we make false conclusions. You make a media mix model and you include, if it's got a daily granularity and you include spend on Google brand, you've got a serious problem, because it's very, very heavily correlated with revenue, because it's following what is inherently warm traffic to the site that's really likely to convert, and it ends up explaining all of the revenue. And I've seen this from professional tools that have been used by clients of ours, and that comes from a place of fitting a model with advanced cool statistics for saturation curves and ad stocks and all these things, but the variable selection process for it is purely model fit based, and therefore ends up with completely false results. So it really is like, it has to be causal, and if you're not kind of trying to do that to some degree, it's not really worth it. There's plenty of non-causal statistics have their place for a lot of useful things. The meta ad platform, trying to predict who to show an ad to next, it doesn't need to necessarily understand why, but we want to understand why, and we want to make decisions, right? So that really is causal analytics is our business. It's what we do all the time, whether we like it or not, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. So yeah, you touched upon the topic of MMM, market mix modeling or media mix modeling, however you want to call it. Why do you think MMs are causal? If you were to give top three reasons to somebody asking this question, what would you say?
You want to use the media mix modeling to decide whether you should spend more or less on a marketing channel. So, if your model isn't causal and it hasn't been built with that in mind, it could be incorrect, right? Like you want to know the cause and effect of doing that. That would be like maybe number one, and number two could be, you don't just want a bunch of numbers and charts that tell you what to do next. You want to understand more about what happened in the past. You don't want to decide what's going on in the future. You want to understand more what happened in the past. How did that really work? Did you make the right decisions? And this modeling process can help with more than just, how to optimize the marketing budget. It can tell you a lot about whether you made the right decision. I mean, I can give a decent example that a company I used to work at, I had a very simple prediction model running based on how much we're discounting and spending. And we ended up doing a clearance sale with 50% off some products. And that went up on the site. A decision was made not to put that in any advertising, not to send out any emails and stuff. And what happened is it kind of ate into the revenue. Whenever we previously put stuff on sale, we would shout about it in our marketing. That would make the ads effective, draw people in, they'd buy, and our spend to revenue shifts outwards, and it generally works really well. But in this case, we're not shouting about it in ads. We're kind of targeting people with the same old buy this stuff at full price. They come along and are happily surprised that they can get them for half price off. And so with the model, you can see suddenly a period that doesn't fit your expectations, and you got to wonder why. And this is where causal inference is important. I mean, what else happened there? If that happened to coincide with you spending on some campaign you really wanted to test, that's an input in your MMM, and you didn't know that happened, you're going to get completely wrong results. And I think there are people, I've spoken to lots of people who've had results from MMMs, and they've just found the results to be implausible and not trusted them, right? And that's why a discussion around this stuff is important. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of money on something sort of fancy, but a bit misled potentially.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I cite to people that MM is causal is because, you can account for almost all the variables out there. In a single standoff experiment, you are just dealing with one or two variables, but with MM, you're trying to account for all the variables. And that is one powerful reason. And coming to MMs again, I have seen a lot of people focus on predictive performance, right? I mean, we have seen this battle go on for many years in statistics. There is this camp which says that, hey, let's be prediction focused, and then there's another camp which is like beta hat, which is like inference focused. So it's always a battle between beta hat and y hat. And what I have seen, I don't know whether you can relate to this, is that people are more focused towards the y hat inference. Like, for example, they say that predictive accuracy is all that is needed to prove that your MM is working. What would be your commentary on that? Do you think it is enough, or it would be a slippery slope?
It's definitely very problematic for me. So if we take a media mix modeling process like Robbins, which uses ridge regression, right? And the promise of this method, right, is if we have really intercorrelated media spends on our different channels, we can, the ridge regression is iterating through and trying, seeing if things work, if it looks a different way and so forth. And basically what ends up happening is we end up with it presenting us with, say, 4 or 3 different models that all give a good fit to our data, with a train and test split potentially as well. But each of them have a completely different opinion, right? One of them thinks Meta's amazing, one of them thinks Google's amazing, and they're all different, right? And it's interesting because in the right hands, you could look at that, you could have a discussion with someone and say, which of these do we think is plausible? Like, we have experts here, we've done this stuff in the past. Like, what, maybe only one of these is actually plausible. And maybe that then you could pick that and maybe you'd be all right, right? But even in this case, like, what you're getting fed back from the modeling about the accuracy or validity of the model is underselling. It's underselling the uncertainty a lot, right? There are a lot of models with very different, all sorts of slight changes in those parameters that all give a good fit to the relatively good fit or similar fit to the data, right? And so, choosing the right one would rather be a causal inference based selection or something. But ultimately, it needs to be. So to summarize, train test fit is only a really good proof of your model validity under the presence of counterfactuals in your test data. But obviously, of course, you can do the statistics and report back on you can do this well and report on the validity of your model, right? You can assess variance inflation factors, how much multicollinearity there is. You can discuss there's a factor here I haven't measured which seems to be affecting it. I don't think it's that, etc. Like you can work towards that goal, right? But if it's pure train test and model fit, there are methods that will make that look great even if they're completely wrong, basically. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty dangerous trap.
Yeah, if I remember one of your LinkedIn comments correctly, I think you had said that in the train and the test split, the spends are the same. So, you're not really, doing any kind of causality. You're just having the same spends. Ideally, there should have been a
Yeah.
counterfactual. I think it's good that you brought up the point of counterfactual. So, to the marketeers, how would you explain what a counterfactual is? Because I get that question a lot, and sometimes even people say that, "Hey, don't you think it's all made up?" Of course it is, but what would be your, explanation to it?
But certainly not made up. But like you can't. I gave a metaphor the other day at a talk, and I said, if you want to understand what makes someone, I don't know, like a good team member or an efficient worker who does well at work in your business, right? And you could say, or I've got all my employees. What makes them good? Is it you've got intelligence and we've got something else, being good socially, something like that, right? Now, if everybody in your sample data is either really good at both or really bad at both, you're not going to be able to infer anything, right? And this is just like a common life thing. If you don't have something to compare to where it's different, you're not really testing if you've understood the difference there. And if we come back to like the modeling question, like I can make a regression model that thinks, if you spend on a channel, it has a negative effect on revenue and it could have a good fit to the data. But it's not plausible, it's useless. So that can't be the final barometer.
Yeah, I mean, we at Arima Labs have the philosophy that, the MM has to predict well as a side effect of having a good, goodness of fit. It cannot be by design that it's predicting well. The moment you start, designing your MM to predict well, you are kind of like, losing sight of the bigger picture, which is like accurate attribution. And I think in that
100%.
sense, yeah,
I think like I kind of understand like what people don't want is to be held accountable, right? Like to the utmost degree, like your modeling is crap because like you can't prove that it's causally true, right? But that's not the direction we're going either, right? It's not like I massively see the value in doing these statistics, trying to do MMM in situations where you have very, very little data. A lot of people say you need 2 years of data, you need this and that. But like knowing some causal inference methodology, knowing a bit of statistics, looking at things, you can use all these tools to tell a story and understand what's going on and make better decisions, right? Um, yeah.
yeah, thanks for that. The other question, related to this is that, okay, there are two schools of thought or two ways of establishing causality. One is the experimentation, that is through RCTs, and then there's the quasi-causal methods. Uh, are RCTs, possible in marketing? Because some platforms, if you recollect, on their documentation, on their website, they say, hey, we do, RCTs. But I think a very recent paper from, I forget the name, but there was a commentary from Ron Kohavi on that paper. And he said that, these experiments are not technically RCTs. They are not randomized well, and and hence you shouldn't be holding them to the higher standards of an RCT. What's your comment on that? Are RCTs possible in marketing?
I think on the surface, at least, it appears Meta probably got quite close with their conversion lift methods that they have. Overall, maybe not. I mean, an important part here is I think I'm not 100% sure, but either that discussion or similar sounding discussions for sure, like relate to A/B testing on ad platforms, right? So, for example, on Facebook ads, if you do an A/B test, you can target an audience, target that same audience again into ad sets, we call them, and it's going to make sure that no one in ad set A sees anything from ad set B, and you can test some stuff, right? But if you see an uplift of one over the other, that doesn't necessarily just mean it's that much better. It's kind of complicated, and those things they have their use, right? Um, on meta ads, you can do conversion lift studies where essentially all the attribution becomes kind of irrelevant for the study. And what meta essentially does is establishes a holdout group that are not going to see ads for a period of time. And the way they bucket people into that groups is essentially the algorithm is working to find people to target the ads to, and it will at random, after selecting someone to target, throw them in the bucket, which essentially means they are looking to ensure a good balance of the makeup of this holdout group, so that, even though if you're holding 12% of the population out from your ads and they were never going to buy anyway, it's obviously a crappy holdout group, right? um so those methods feel pretty good. They can replicate it. They can kind of do that because of the massive scale they've got and the sort of login profile based measurement that they can execute. But yeah, I don't know if other social channels where they're at with this kind of testing at the moment. I imagine it's all in development or probably happening at the moment. But that's the closest I think we can get to it.
Understood. Uh, but don't you think that, of course, we can take care of randomization. There are algorithms for it, there are methodologies for it. But in marketing, you can never really control for it, right? I mean, there could be violations in the sense that, people could jump from one group to the other, or could be accidentally or willfully be exposed to the other ad or, something like that. So don't you think the control part of the RCT is somewhere, it's always lacking in marketing, and because of which, people are commenting that, yeah, maybe RCTs are not possible.
I think it's a that's a fair criticism, and it's something we all have to discuss. But it's certainly, like, with this new technology, we're way closer to it. I think that kind of result is pretty valuable. But like with everything, everything's an estimate, no matter how fancy and complicated it sounds. And we have to look at everything with and think of the limitations and biases. If there's one thing that's been drummed into my head very hard as a researcher, it's limitations of kind of everything, right? Um, and with the lift study, you've got ad stock problems as well. Like, the estimate has a bias because of the ad stock of ad spend that happened before the test started, and there's always a lot of issues with everything. But I'd say also things having issues shouldn't be a reason not to do them, try them, look at them, and figure things out, because it also can be dependent business to business, case by case, right? So
So, yeah, so I mean, extending our talk, going much more deeper into the causality topics, there is this topic of confounders. I found in multiple comments of yours, you kept mentioning that, in marketing, you should account for confounders. What kind of confounders have you typically seen or dealt with or have included? Maybe you can, give us examples from, your work at Work.London or something previous to it. Yeah.
um sales is the number one. And when I say sales, I mean like promotional sales, like putting a discount on the website and sticking ads out there telling everyone that you're on discount, that whole game. And we work with a lot of small medium sized businesses for whom that's often a really big driver of growth. And next to that, its sister being basically Black Friday sales. And I've had a good time predicting Black Friday sales for a lot of people, both in house and at the agency, and it's always a really interesting puzzle, right? Like, we might observe price elasticity throughout the year. We did a 25% off in Feb. We did a 50% off in June. But then we're going Black Friday and we're going to do 25% off, and it's potentially a whole new kettle of fish, right? Um, so yeah, like, that would be the number one. And number two is seasonality. And seasonality is an interesting one. Like I think for people newer to the statistics or the analysis, it's, oh, I can just measure seasonality with the profit style. I'm just going to look at the pattern over the previous years and kind of use that. But if you're looking at it from a causal perspective, you want to find out what numbers actually lie behind that. Like if it's a gifting business, Google search trends essentially is one of my favorite tools. You can find a lot of really interesting indices in there to indicate demand for different things. And certainly in some cases found so important that modeling an interaction effect between a Google search demand trend for some keyword and having an interaction effect between the business's spend and that term to be like incredibly powerful to kind of unlock and understand like the impact the spend on their ads have had.
Understood. Yeah, thanks for that. Uh, with regards to making causal methods adoptable to various organizations. Of course, that making sure that MMs are adopted itself is a very hard task. You have to explain the nuances, what it can do for you, everything. Uh, what are the typical challenges that you see with respect to causal inference adoption?
Well, it's a funny one because I feel like causal inference is a lot more approachable than raw statistics, especially for people working in marketing who maybe are not, as interested in stats and, don't never done haven't thought about linear regression for many years, if at all, ever. I think that stuff's really relatable. And there are people out, lots of great people out there, including yourselves, developing, really awesome statistics and methods for going about all this stuff. But the person who wants to be the link between the really great statisticians and the decision makers in the business, um, or someone who's in a position to kind of guide the analytics, because ultimately the statisticians doing the modeling, they need to hear from the business. If you don't provide them information on when you went on sale, when you updated your website, when you introduced that new product, and like all this kind of really important stuff that you talk about all day, like you should be sharing that and talking about that. So yeah, I mean, the challenge is to get people interested in it, I guess. But it seems like a easier challenge to me than trying to teach people how to do a multiple linear regression model. So I mean, maybe it's more of an opportunity than we think.
Yeah,
I mean,
one
I'm
of the
really surprised how relevant what I did back then is to what I do now, actually.
Yeah, one of the tricky questions that I have encountered is that yes, of course, you can almost always validate MMMs. You can also validate experiments, but how can you say that your causal methods have been validated? Is there any metric around that?
I think like an R squared esque model fit to a test period where there's a counterfactual, definitely. I think I think it's going to be relatively rare. I mean, if you're blessed with a data set that has enough counterfactuals and testing in it that you can already create some train test splits where you can, train from one and infer to the other and make a good case, right? But probably, I really believe this stuff, the consultancy element is massive, right? Like the MMM is telling you, is helping you choose what to try next. And a lot of people talk about testing and having a testing budget for various things in marketing. But, if you really keep money to the side to take some risk and make some spend changes, because at the end of the day, you could be totally intercorrelated. It could be a total problem and you can't prove that. But you can work together and come with a decent theory of what it might be and give it a shot. And if it works, you'll be able to prove that it worked. I mean, that's not so. I mean, it's possible. It is fit to a counterfactual period that's going to prove it, right? But yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily we don't need it. We don't need to always show that we have it to like be good and to do good work and to be useful. Like often I think that's going to be the produce of estimating a model, working together, and then trying something out.
Sure. Thanks for that. So one last question before I open the floor to the audience for questions. If somebody is starting to learn causal inference, causal methodology, what are the best resources you would tell them to follow?
Um, I think there's a lot of interesting literature out there for a quick Google search that I'm not sure if I can add to too much. But a book that I really like, or I find books on epidemiology to be very interesting that talk about how we arrive like conclusively at what we know over the course of multiple studies. Um, in the process of thought of what's gone into that is really exciting. So let me just wanted to recommend one book which I now haven't written down, so I have to Google quickly to remind me of the name. um, Maybe I can provide you afterwards because I'm having a mind block now and I
Sure, no
know.
problem.
Well, I'll remember
That's
during. I'll remember while we're chatting.
yeah, not an issue. Yeah, yeah. One last question, Alex. Aman asked, "What is your favorite quasi-causal method? Do you have a favorite quasi-causal method?"
Um, I'm not sure, really. Uh, I just think DAGs are great. I just think DAGs are really like when I started learning this stuff in epidemiology, we learned about confounders, mediators, moderators, how to look at all this stuff. But it was only towards the end of my time doing that that I was introduced to DAGs and using them to draw everything out. And you can do so much interesting stuff with that. Um, so I just think in general that's a super interesting thing to learn. And like if anything I've seen in statistics, the most like applicable to like our daily lives as we get plastered with statistics and information and try and make sense of, the actual world around us. So I'm just gonna cheap out here and just say DAGs in general.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think we will not hold you up more. And thanks for your time. And this was, quote and unquote, my first podcast hosting. I mean, it's not a technical podcast hosting, but still we tried. But yeah, thanks for joining. And I hope we can have more conversations like this and, involve more people. But yeah, thanks to everyone who asked really insightful question. It really made us think. And yeah, thank you, Alex, from the whole team.
Thank you. It's been really great.